I watched my stepmother's face drain of color as I walked into the boardroom, and I savored every second of her shock. "Good morning, everyone," I said, settling into the chair at the head of the conference table. "I'm Emma Chen, your new CEO. I believe some of you already know me." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Beside her, my stepsister Vanessa had gone completely rigid, her perfectly manicured hands frozen on the table. My father, weak, pathetic Richard Chen, looked like he might have a heart attack. "Emma," he whispered, "but you're supposed to be dead?" I finished for him, allowing myself a cold smile. "Not quite, though you certainly tried your best." Let me back up. 6 months ago, I died in a hospital bed at 23 years old, alone and penniless, my body ravaged by an illness I couldn't afford to treat. As I took my last breath, my final thought was of the family who had abandoned me, who had stolen everything from me and left me to rot, and then I woke up. I woke up in my childhood bedroom in my 18-year-old body on the morning of my high school graduation, the same day my life had begun to fall apart the first time. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the memories were too vivid, too painful. I remembered everything. 5 years of systematic abuse, theft, and betrayal. 5 years of watching my stepmother and stepsister live in luxury while I struggled to survive. 5 years that had ended with my death in a charity ward, too poor to even afford painkillers. This time, things would be different. This time, I knew exactly what they were planning, and I was going to destroy them all. The abuse had started the day my father married Patricia, when I was 13. My mother had died 2 years earlier, and I'd been desperate for a family again. I'd actually been happy when Dad told me he'd found someone new. Happy when I met Patricia and her daughter Vanessa, who was a year older than me. What a fool I'd been. Patricia was a master manipulator. In public, she was the perfect stepmother, attentive, caring, generous. But behind closed doors, she was a monster. She started small, commenting on my weight, comparing me unfavorably to Vanessa, forgetting to include me in family outings. My father, blinded by infatuation, never noticed. Or maybe he just didn't want to. By the time I was 15, Patricia had convinced my father that I was difficult, ungrateful, and spoiled. She'd poisoned our relationship so thoroughly that he barely spoke to me anymore. When I tried to tell him what was happening, he accused me of being jealous of Vanessa and trying to ruin his marriage. Vanessa, meanwhile, was her mother's daughter in every way. She was beautiful, charming, and utterly cruel. She excelled at subtle torments, stealing my things and denying it, spreading rumors about me at school, sabotaging my friendships. She was smart enough to never leave evidence, and I was too young and naive to fight back effectively. The real nightmare began after my high school graduation. In my first life, I'd been offered a job at my graduation party, a connection my father had through his work. It was an entry-level position at Tech Vision Solutions, a promising startup that was looking for young talent. The salary wasn't huge, but it was a foot in the door, a chance to build a career. I'd been so excited. What I didn't know was that Patricia and Vanessa had already decided that job should be Vanessa's. They waited until the morning I was supposed to start. I'd laid out my outfit the night before, set 3 alarms, gone to bed early. I was terrified of being late on my first day, but when I woke up, it was already 11 a.m. Someone had turned off all my alarms and moved my phone across the room. I'd panicked, thrown on clothes, and rushed to the office. But when I arrived, flustered and apologizing, the HR manager had looked at me with confusion. "I'm sorry, but the position has been filled," she'd said. "Your sister called this morning and said you'd had a family emergency and couldn't take the job. She offered to fill in for you, and we needed someone to start immediately, so—" Vanessa had stolen my job. When I confronted them at home, Patricia had smiled sweetly and said, "Well, you weren't there, were you? Vanessa was just being helpful. Besides, she's more qualified anyway. You should be grateful we didn't let the opportunity go to waste." My father had sided with them. "Stop being so dramatic, Emma. It's just a job. You'll find another one." But I didn't find another one, not for months. And by then, Vanessa had made herself indispensable at Tech Vision. She'd charmed the founders, impressed the investors, and positioned herself as a rising star. When I finally did get a job, a minimum wage position at a retail store, Patricia made sure to comment on it at every family dinner. "It's such a shame Emma doesn't have Vanessa's ambition," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But I suppose some people are just meant for simpler lives. Over the next 5 years, they systematically destroyed me. When my grandmother died and left me a trust fund, Patricia convinced my father to let her manage it for me. She drained the account and invested it in Vanessa's business ventures, ventures that never seemed to materialize but that kept Patricia and Vanessa living in luxury. When I was accepted to night school to finish my college degree, Vanessa sabotaged my applications for financial aid by stealing my identity and opening credit cards in my name, ruining my credit score. When I finally saved enough money to move out, Patricia threw a fit and convinced my father to demand I pay them back for all the years they'd supported me. The amount she claimed was absurd, hundreds of thousands of dollars. My father threatened to sue me if I didn't pay. I lost my savings to their lawyer fees before I realized they had no real case. Through it all, Vanessa thrived. She rose through the ranks at Tech Vision, eventually becoming a VP. She lived in a penthouse apartment, drove a luxury car, wore designer clothes. She posted about her perfect life on social media constantly, and Patricia made sure I saw every post. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs just to afford a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. I ate ramen for dinner most nights. I had no health insurance, no savings, no hope. And then I got sick. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion. But the symptoms got worse. Constant pain, weight loss, chronic fatigue. By the time I finally scraped together enough money to see a doctor, it was too late. Stage 4 cancer, terminal, nothing they could do. I called my father from the hospital, begged him to visit me, to help me. He hung up. Patricia had convinced him I was faking it for attention. I died alone, in debt from medical bills I could never pay. My last thought, a bitter wish that I could go back and do it all differently. And then I got my chance. Waking up on graduation day with 5 years of memories was disorienting. I'd spent the first hour just sitting in bed, touching my face, my arms, confirming that I was really 18 again, really alive, really being given a second chance. Then I'd started planning. I knew everything now. I knew Patricia's playbook, knew every manipulation she'd use. I knew Vanessa's tricks and my father's weaknesses. Most importantly, I knew about Tech Vision. In my first life, Vanessa had ridden Tech Vision's success to wealth and power. She'd been there from the beginning, had made connections with the founders and early investors. By the time I died, Tech Vision was a major player in the tech industry worth billions. But I also knew Tech Vision's secrets. I'd heard Vanessa bragging about them over the years, secure in the knowledge that I was too broken to do anything with the information. I knew about the founder's gambling problem, the CTO's affair with an investor's wife, the CFO's creative accounting that bordered on fraud. I knew which products would succeed and which would fail. I knew which investments would pay off and which would tank. I had 5 years of insider knowledge that Vanessa had worked hard to obtain, and I was going to use it to take everything from her. But I had to be smart. I couldn't just show up at Tech Vision and expect them to hire me over Vanessa. They didn't know me, and I had no credentials yet. I needed to position myself strategically, build my own power base, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. So I made a decision. I was going to let them take the job again. I was going to let them think they'd won. And then I was going to destroy them all. The morning I was supposed to start at Tech Vision, I pretended to oversleep. I made sure Patricia and Vanessa saw me rushing around frantically, just like before. I even let Vanessa make the call to HR, offering to take my place. But this time, I had a plan. While they were celebrating their little victory, I was across town meeting with a very different kind of opportunity. Using information I'd gleaned from my previous life, I'd tracked down Marcus Webb, a venture capitalist who would, in 3 years' time, become one of the most successful investors in Silicon Valley. Right now, though, Marcus was struggling. His last 2 investments had failed spectacularly, and he was on the verge of being pushed out by his partners. He was desperate for a win, desperate enough to take a meeting with an 18-year-old girl who'd cold called his office, claiming to have the next big thing. I'd spent the weeks leading up to graduation preparing for this meeting. I'd written a business plan for a company that didn't exist yet, but would, I knew, revolutionize the industry. The idea was something I'd heard discussed at a tech conference in my previous life, a concept that was years ahead of its time. I'd tweaked it, refined it, and packaged it perfectly for Marcus's current needs. "You're 18?" Marcus had said skeptically when I walked into his office. "You just graduated high school?" And you're 42 with an MBA from Stanford and 15 years of experience, and your last two investments lost your firm $40 million. I'd replied calmly. Age clearly isn't a guarantee of success, Mr. Webb, but vision is. He'd been taken aback by my bluntness, but I'd caught his attention. I'd spent the next hour walking him through my proposal, demonstrating market research I'd compiled using my foreknowledge, and making financial projections that I knew would be accurate because I'd already lived through them. By the end of the meeting, Marcus was intrigued. By the end of the week, he'd agreed to fund my company. I called it Phoenix Solutions. Because I'd risen from the ashes of my first life, and I was going to burn my enemies to the ground. The first year was brutal. Building a company from scratch would have been hard enough, but I was also playing a long game with my family. I had to maintain the appearance of failure, of being the same pathetic Emma they'd always known, while secretly building an empire. I moved out of my father's house immediately, citing a need for independence. Patricia had been thrilled. One less mouth to feed, one less reminder of my father's first wife. I'd rented a tiny apartment in a building that Marcus owned, paying a fraction of the normal rent in exchange for equity in Phoenix Solutions. To my family, I was working retail again, barely scraping by. They didn't need to know that I was spending every spare moment building Phoenix Solutions, recruiting top talent, and making strategic partnerships. I used my foreknowledge ruthlessly. I knew which programmers were brilliant but undervalued, which designers would become industry leaders, which business strategists were ahead of their time. I recruited them all, offering equity and the chance to build something revolutionary. I also knew which technologies were about to become obsolete and which were about to explode. I positioned Phoenix Solutions perfectly to capitalize on every major shift in the industry. Within 6 months, we'd launched our first product, a cloud-based project management system that integrated AI in ways that wouldn't become standard for another 2 years. Within a year, we had Fortune 500 companies as clients, but I kept it quiet. I used shell companies and NDAs to hide my involvement. To the outside world, Phoenix Solutions was led by a reclusive genius who shunned publicity. Only Marcus and my core team knew the truth. Meanwhile, I watched my family from a distance. Vanessa was thriving at Tech Vision, just as she had before. She'd charmed the founders, particularly CEO David Morrison, a brilliant but naive 26-year-old who was dazzled by her confidence and beauty. She'd made herself indispensable, just as I knew she would. But I also knew David's secret. He was in love with his co-founder and CTO, Sarah Chen. He didn't know how to tell her, and he was using work as a distraction. Vanessa was taking advantage of his emotional vulnerability, positioning herself as a confidant and advisor. In my first life, David and Sarah had eventually gotten together, but not before Vanessa had leveraged David's trust to gain significant power in the company. This time, I was going to speed things up. Using an anonymous email account, I sent Sarah a carefully crafted message. It included screenshots of David's private messages to friends, obtained through a hacker I'd hired, clearly showing his feelings for her. It also included a warning about Vanessa, framed as coming from a concerned employee who'd seen her manipulate previous employers. 2 weeks later, David and Sarah got together. Within a month, they'd restructured the company's leadership, and Vanessa's power had been significantly reduced. She was still a VP, but she'd lost her special access to David. I'd seen her at a coffee shop shortly after, looking stressed and angry. I'd savored every second of her discomfort, even as I'd kept my face carefully neutral and avoided eye contact. Phase 1 complete. Year 2 was when things got interesting. Phoenix Solutions was exploding. We'd gone from a handful of clients to hundreds. Our revenue had hit $50 million, and we were being courted by major investors. Marcus was ecstatic. I'd made him a very wealthy man and restored his reputation. But I was still keeping my involvement secret. I attended meetings via video call with my face obscured and my voice modulated. I signed contracts using a carefully constructed legal identity that couldn't be traced back to Emma Chen. To the world, I was a ghost. To my family, I was still a failure. I'd kept the retail job as a cover, working a few shifts a week to maintain the illusion. Patricia never missed an opportunity to mention my disappointing life at family dinners I attended religiously because watching them underestimate me was part of the plan. "How's work, Emma?" she'd ask sweetly, her eyes gleaming with malice. "It's fine," I'd say quietly, playing the part of the cowed, defeated daughter. "Still at that little shop?" "That's nice, dear." Some people are just meant for simpler lives. She'd exchange a knowing look with Vanessa, who'd smirk into her wine glass. My father would say nothing, eyes on his plate, avoiding conflict as always. During this time, I was also systematically dismantling their financial security. Patricia had been living off the money she'd stolen from my trust fund, but she'd been spending it faster than she'd earned it. She had expensive taste and no actual income of her own. I'd hired a forensic accountant to dig into Patricia's finances. It turned out she'd been embezzling from my father's business, small amounts at first, but increasingly large sums as she'd gotten bolder. She'd hidden it well, but my accountant was better. I gathered evidence meticulously. Bank statements, forged documents, email trails. I compiled it all into a comprehensive file and waited for the right moment to use it. Meanwhile, Vanessa was having her own problems at TechVision. Without David's preferential treatment, her incompetence was starting to show. She'd been coasting on charm and manipulation, but Sarah, who was far more competent and observant, was starting to notice. I'd also been anonymously feeding Sarah information about Vanessa's past. Nothing that could be traced back to me, but enough to raise red flags. Stories from former colleagues about plagiarism, about taking credit for others' work, about subtle workplace bullying. Sarah started investigating. Vanessa's position at TechVision was becoming precarious. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. TechVision announced they were looking for a major strategic partner to help them expand into new markets. It was a huge deal, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The company that won the partnership would gain significant influence over TechVision's direction. I knew this was coming. In my first life, TechVision had partnered with a larger corporation that had eventually absorbed them in a hostile takeover. The founders had lost everything, and Vanessa had jumped ship to another company just in time to avoid the fallout. This time, things would be different. I had Phoenix Solutions submit a bid. The partnership announcement was big news in the tech world. Dozens of companies submitted proposals, but only 3 made it to the final round. A major corporation, a well-established mid-size firm, and Phoenix Solutions, the mysterious newcomer that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. TechVision's leadership was intrigued by Phoenix. We'd offered better terms than our competitors, demonstrated deeper technical expertise, and shown a clear vision for mutual growth, but they were nervous about our secrecy. "We need to meet the CEO," David told Marcus during a preliminary meeting. "We're not signing a $100 million deal with a ghost." "The CEO values privacy," Marcus had replied carefully. "But I can assure you, not good enough," Sarah interrupted. "We need to know who we're partnering with. It's non-negotiable." Marcus had looked at me via our private video call. I'd nodded. It was time. "The CEO will attend the final presentation," Marcus said, in person. I'd spent the next 2 weeks preparing. This was going to be my grand reveal, and it needed to be perfect. I'd rehearsed my presentation hundreds of times. I'd prepared responses to every possible question. I'd even hired a stylist to help me craft the perfect appearance. Professional, confident, powerful. The day of the final presentation, I arrived at TechVision's headquarters in a chauffeured car wearing a designer suit that cost more than my family thought I made in 6 months. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup flawless. I looked like a CEO. I felt like a weapon. But I didn't go into the presentation room immediately. First, I had a different meeting. Vanessa was in her office preparing for the partnership presentations. As a VP, she'd be in the room for the final decisions. She had no idea what was about to hit her. I knocked on her door. "Come in," she called, not looking up from her computer. I opened the door and stepped inside. "Hello, Vanessa." She glanced up, then did a double take. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for a meeting," I said calmly. "I'm presenting a partnership proposal to your leadership team." She stared at me, confusion turning to suspicion. "You? That's impossible. You work retail. You don't know anything about tech." "Don't I?" I smiled. "Tell me, Vanessa, how is TechVision treating you these days? I heard Sarah's been asking questions about your performance." Her face paled. "How do you know about that?" "I make it my business to know things," I said, "especially when those things concern my competitors." "Your competitors?" "Emma, what the hell are you talking about?" I checked my watch. I have a presentation to give. But don't worry, you'll understand everything very soon. I left her office, savoring the look of confusion and fear on her face. The presentation room was packed. David and Sarah sat at the head of the table, flanked by their executive team. Vanessa slipped in at the last moment, still looking shaken from our encounter. She took a seat near the back, her eyes fixed on me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, "thank you for having us today. It's my privilege to introduce the founder and CEO of Phoenix Solutions, who will be presenting our partnership proposal. May I introduce Emma Chen?" The room erupted. Vanessa shot to her feet. "What? That's impossible." David and Sarah exchanged confused glances. Several other executives were whispering to each other. "Please sit down," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "I know this is a surprise, but I assure you everything is legitimate. If you'll give me 30 minutes, I'll explain everything." "Emma, is this some kind of joke?" David asked. "You're Vanessa's sister, your stepsister," I corrected. "And I'm also the CEO of a company that's grown from 0 to 100 million in revenue in 18 months. I'm the person who's offering you the best partnership deal you're going to get, and I'm the person who's about to show you exactly what Vanessa has been hiding from you." Vanessa's face went white. "You can't—" "Sit down, Vanessa," I said coldly, "or security will escort you out." She sat. For the next 30 minutes, I delivered the best presentation of my life. I walked them through Phoenix Solutions technology, our market position, our growth trajectory. I showed them detailed plans for integration, expansion, and mutual profit. I demonstrated technical knowledge that left their engineers nodding in approval. But more than that, I told a story. I told them about a girl who'd been robbed of an opportunity at their company, who'd been left for dead by her family, who'd built an empire from nothing through sheer determination and intelligence. I didn't name Vanessa specifically, not yet. But I made it clear that my success had come despite significant obstacles, and that I understood better than anyone how to spot talent and dedication. By the end of my presentation, the room was silent. "Questions?" I asked. Sarah raised her hand. "Yeah. Why did you hide your identity for so long?" "Because I knew that if certain people knew what I was building, they'd try to sabotage me," I said, looking directly at Vanessa. "I've learned that sometimes the best way to succeed is to let your enemies underestimate you until it's too late for them to stop you." "And why reveal yourself now?" David asked. "Because I don't need to hide anymore," I said simply. "I've built something that can't be torn down. I've achieved a position where my enemies can't touch me. And I'm ready to show the world exactly who Emma Chen really is." "I have a question," Vanessa said, her voice shaking. "How did you do this? How did you were working retail. You had nothing. How did you build a $100 million company in less than 2 years?" I smiled at her. It wasn't a kind smile. "I did it by being smarter than you, Vanessa. By being harder working. By being everything our parents always told me I couldn't be. But most importantly, I did it by learning from my mistakes. By learning what happens when you trust the wrong people." I turned back to David and Sarah. "I have one more piece of information to share before you make your decision. It concerns Vanessa's position here at TechVision." I pulled out a tablet and pulled up a series of documents. These are internal reports from 3 companies where Vanessa worked before joining TechVision. As you'll see, she was investigated at 2 of them for plagiarism and taking credit for others' work. At the 3rd, she was asked to leave after complaints of workplace harassment. Vanessa lunged forward. Those are lies. They're sealed HR records," I said calmly. "Sealed legally, but accessible to someone who knows where to look and has the resources to get them. I've verified every single document with former employees who were willing to go on record." I pulled up another set of files. These are analyses of every major project Vanessa has headed since joining TechVision. In every case, the actual work was done by other team members. Vanessa's contributions were minimal, but she positioned herself to take credit. Sarah was leaning forward now, studying the documents on the screen I was projecting. "Finally," I said, "I have evidence that Vanessa has been using her position here to steal proprietary information and sell it to your competitors. Small details, nothing that would crash the company, but enough to make a significant side income. That was a lie. Vanessa hadn't been selling secrets. Yet. But in my first life, she'd started doing exactly that about 6 months from now, and I knew how to make it look like she'd already started. That's not true! Vanessa was on her feet again, her face red. She's lying. She's making this up because she's jealous, because I took a job she wanted, because you stole it, I said, my voice cold as ice. You stole my job, Vanessa. On the morning I was supposed to start, you called HR and told them I'd had a family emergency. You took my place and built your career on a foundation of lies and theft. And you know what? I'm grateful, because if you hadn't stolen that job, I might never have learned how ruthless I needed to be. I might never have built Phoenix Solutions, so thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for teaching me that the only person I can trust is myself. The room was dead silent. Sarah spoke first. David, can we have a moment with just the executive team? I nodded. Of course, Marcus and I will be outside. As we filed out, I locked eyes with Vanessa. She looked terrified. Good. They kept us waiting for 2 hours. I spent the time checking my phone, reading reports from my other business ventures, and occasionally smiling at Marcus, who looked both proud and slightly terrified of me. You really went for the throat, he said. She tried to destroy me, I replied. I'm just returning the favor. Finally, Sarah emerged. Emma, David and I would like to speak with you. Alone, please. I followed her into a smaller conference room. David was there, looking serious. First, Sarah said, we're accepting Phoenix Solutions' partnership proposal. It's the best offer we received, and your technical expertise is undeniable. I nodded. I'd known they would choose us. In terms of pure business value, there was no competition. Second, David said, we're terminating Vanessa's employment, effective immediately. We're conducting a full investigation into her conduct, and we'll be contacting the companies she worked for previously. If your allegations are correct, and preliminary review suggests they are, we'll be pursuing legal action. Good, I said. Third, Sarah said, leaning forward, we want to know why you didn't just come to us with this information from the beginning. Why build a whole company? Why go through all of this? I met her eyes. Because coming to you with complaints about my stepsister would have made me look petty and jealous. But coming to you as a successful CEO with $100 million company and concrete evidence makes me look competent and thorough. I didn't want your pity. I wanted your respect. And I wanted Vanessa to see exactly what she'd lost when she stole that job from me. David nodded slowly, went, That's actually brilliant, ruthless, but brilliant. I learned from the best, I said. Vanessa and Patricia taught me everything I know about manipulation and long-term planning. I'm just better at it than they are. Patricia? Sarah asked. My stepmother, I said. She's the one who trained Vanessa to be what she is. And she's the one who's been bleeding my father's business dry for the past 5 years. I pulled out another tablet. This is for you, not for TechVision. Consider it a gift. These are financial records showing that Patricia has been embezzling from my father's company. If you pass these to the appropriate authorities, she'll be in prison within 6 months. I stood up. Now, shall we go give Vanessa the news? Watching Vanessa be escorted from the building by security was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. She was crying, mascara running down her face, her perfect composure shattered. She'd tried to plead with David, then with Sarah, then with me. None of us had listened. As security led her past me, she'd grabbed my arm. Emma, please, you can't do this. I'm your sister. I'd pulled my arm away. You're not my sister. You're a thief who stole from me and tried to ruin my life. And now you're experiencing the consequences of your actions. Enjoy unemployment, Vanessa. I hear retail is hiring. The look of absolute hatred on her face had been beautiful. But I wasn't done yet. Phase 2 was complete, but Phase 3 was about to begin. Patricia called me that evening, her voice shrill with fury. What did you do? Vanessa just called me in tears. She says you got her fired. I didn't get her fired, I said calmly. She got herself fired by being incompetent and unethical. I just provided the evidence. You vindictive little bitch. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me, I laughed. Patricia, you stole my inheritance, destroyed my credit, and convinced my father that I was worthless. You've spent the last 5 years trying to break me. How's that? Working out for you? There was a long silence. What do you want? She asked finally, her voice cold. I want you at family dinner this Sunday, I said. You, Vanessa, and Dad. I have some things to share with all of you. Why would we? Because if you don't show up, I'm going to the police with evidence of your embezzlement on Monday morning, I said. But if you come to dinner, I might be willing to negotiate. She hung up without another word. But I knew she'd be there. Patricia was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She knew when she was trapped. Sunday dinner was held at my father's house, the same house I'd grown up in. I arrived in my chauffeured car wearing another designer suit, carrying a briefcase full of documents. My father answered the door. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, but a ghost of the love I'd once had for him. Then I remembered him hanging up on me when I'd called from the hospital, and the feeling vanished. Emma, he said, you look different. I am different, I said, walking past him into the house. Patricia and Vanessa were in the living room. Patricia looked angry but controlled. Vanessa looked like she'd been crying for days. Neither of them stood when I entered. Let's make this quick, I said, setting my briefcase on the coffee table. I have a board meeting tomorrow morning. A board meeting? My father asked, confused. Emma, what's going on? I pulled out a folder and handed it to him. This is Phoenix Solutions' latest financial report. As you can see, we're now valued at over $200 million. That makes me, as majority shareholder, worth about $140 million. My father's face went pale as he read the document. That's impossible, Patricia said. Emma doesn't have that kind of money. She works retail. I worked retail as a cover, I said. While you were spending your time congratulating yourselves on destroying me, I was building an empire. While Vanessa was stealing credit for other people's work, I was creating something real. While you were living off stolen money, I was earning my wealth legitimately. I pulled out another folder and tossed it on Patricia's lap. Those are bank records showing that you've embezzled over $2 million from Dad's business over the past 5 years. I've sent copies to the SEC and the FBI. You're going to prison, Patricia. She went white. And you, I turned to Vanessa. You're unemployed, unemployable, and about to be named in multiple lawsuits from Tech Vision. Your reputation is destroyed. No tech company will touch you after this. Emma, my father said weakly. Please, you can't... Can't what? I turned on him. Can't hold them accountable for what they did to me? Can't demand justice? Where were you, Dad? Where were you when Patricia was stealing from me? Where were you when Vanessa stole my job? Where were you when I was dying in a hospital bed calling you for help? What are you talking about? He asked. You weren't in a hospital. Not yet, I said. But I would have been. In the life where they succeeded in destroying me, I ended up with cancer. Terminal. I died alone because you chose them over me. I died knowing that my own father had abandoned me for a woman who was stealing from him and a stepdaughter who was a fraud. I pulled out one more folder. This is for you, Dad. It's a detailed report on everything they've done. The embezzlement, the theft, the manipulation, everything. You can choose to believe it or not. You can choose to press charges or not, but if you don't, I will. I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door. Emma, wait, my father called after me. Please, can we talk about this? Can we? There's nothing to talk about, I said. I gave you countless chances to be my father, to protect me, to see what was happening. You chose them every time. So now you get to live with the consequences. I paused at the door and looked back at them one last time. Oh, and Patricia, Vanessa, you're not welcome at my wedding. Wedding? Vanessa asked, confused. I'm getting married in 6 months, I said. To Marcus Webb. We've been together for a year now. He's brilliant, kind, and incredibly wealthy. We're going to be very happy, but don't worry, I'll send you pictures from prison. The look on their faces made the entire year of planning worth it. That night, I went home to the penthouse apartment I'd bought 3 months earlier. Marcus was waiting for me, champagne on ice. How did it go? He asked, pulling me into a hug. Perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. We weren't actually engaged yet. That had been a lie designed to hurt them. But Marcus and I had grown close over the past year, and I suspected he would propose soon. We'd started as business partners, but somewhere along the way, it had become something more. He was the first person I'd told about my rebirth, about my memories of dying. I'd expected him to think I was crazy, but instead he'd just held me and said, "Then let's make sure this life is worth living." I'd fallen in love with him in that moment. The police are picking up Patricia tomorrow morning, Marcus said. Her lawyer called. She's going to try to make a deal, claim she was coerced. It won't work, I said. I made sure the evidence was ironclad. And Vanessa? Unemployed and unemployable. Tech Vision is suing her for fraud. She'll be lucky if she doesn't end up in prison, too. And your father? I was quiet for a moment. I gave him a choice. He can do the right thing, or he can protect them. Either way, I'm done. Marcus kissed my forehead. You did good, Emma. They had it coming. I know, I said, but I keep thinking, what if this is wrong? What if I'm becoming just like them? You're nothing like them, Marcus said firmly. They tried to destroy you out of cruelty and jealousy. You held them accountable for their actions. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? I manipulated them. I lied. I used my foreknowledge to survive, Marcus interrupted. To build something real. To protect yourself from people who had already proven they'd hurt you. Emma, you're not a monster. You're a survivor who refused to be a victim twice. I let myself lean into him, let myself believe his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was about justice. Either way, it was done. The next 6 months were a whirlwind. Patricia was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. She tried to claim she was innocent, that I'd fabricated the evidence, but the paper trail was too solid. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. My father divorced her immediately. He tried to reach out to me several times, but I didn't respond. Some wounds were too deep to heal. Vanessa filed for bankruptcy after Tech Vision's lawsuit. She tried to get a job in other industries, but her reputation had preceded her. Last I heard, she was working as a hostess at a restaurant in a different state, using her mother's maiden name. Phoenix Solutions went from strength to strength. Our partnership with Tech Vision was incredibly successful. Within a year, we'd expanded into 3 new markets and doubled our revenue. By year 3, we'd gone public, and I'd become one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Marcus proposed on the anniversary of the day we first met. We got married in a small, private ceremony with just our closest friends and colleagues. No family. I'd learned that sometimes you have to choose your own family. David and Sarah from Tech Vision came to the wedding. They'd become good friends, and Sarah had become something of a mentor to me. She'd been through her own struggles with sexism in tech, and we'd bonded over shared experiences. You know, Sarah said to me at the reception, when you walked into that boardroom 2 years ago, I thought you were crazy. The youngest person in the room by 20 years, going up against your own family, claiming to run a $100 million company. I thought it was either a scam or a nervous breakdown. And now? I asked. Now I think you're the smartest person I've ever met, she said, and the strongest. What you did, building a company while dealing with that level of family abuse, it's remarkable. I had help, I said, glancing at Marcus across the room, and I had motivation. Revenge is a powerful motivator, Sarah agreed. It wasn't about revenge, I said, not entirely. It was about proving to myself that I could do it, that I was worth something, that they were wrong about me. They were very wrong about you, Sarah said. But I don't think you needed to prove that to yourself. I think you always knew. Maybe she was right. Maybe deep down, even in my darkest moments in my first life, I'd known I was capable of more. Maybe that was why dying had been so bitter. Not just the physical pain, but the waste of it. The knowledge that I'd had potential I'd never been allowed to realize. This time, I'd realized every bit of it. 5 years after my rebirth, I stood on stage at a tech conference delivering a keynote speech about entrepreneurship and overcoming adversity. The audience of 5,000 people hung on my every word. I didn't tell them about dying and being reborn. That secret was between me and Marcus. But I told them about being underestimated, about having opportunities stolen, about building success despite systemic obstacles. There's a moment, I said, when you realize that the people who are supposed to support you are actually holding you back. It's a painful moment. It can break you or it can free you. I chose freedom. I chose to stop waiting for permission to be successful and just be successful. I chose to stop listening to people who told me I wasn't good enough and start proving them wrong. The applause was thunderous. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous but determined. Ms. Chen, I just wanted to say, your story really resonated with me. My family doesn't support my dreams either. They want me to give up my startup and get a real job. I was about to give in, but after hearing you speak, I think I'm going to keep fighting. I smiled at her. What's your startup? It's a platform for connecting freelance artists with clients, she said. We're still small, but I believe in it. Send me your pitch deck, I said, handing her my card. Phoenix Solutions has a venture capital arm now. We invest in promising founders, especially ones who are fighting uphill battles. Her eyes widened. Really? Really, I said. But here's the condition. You have to promise me that if you succeed, when you succeed, you'll do the same thing for someone else. Pay it forward. Help another underdog. I promise, she said, tears in her eyes. As she walked away, Marcus appeared at my side. That was kind of you. It's self-interest, I said. The best founders are the ones who are hungry, who have something to prove. That girl reminds me of me. You mean she reminds you of who you pretended to be? Marcus teased. No, I said seriously. She reminds me of who I actually was before I died. Desperate, underestimated, and capable of so much more than anyone gave me credit for. I'm not giving her charity. I'm making an investment. In her company or in her? Both. We left the conference center and walked out into the evening air. The city stretched out before us, full of lights and possibilities. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked. The way you destroyed them? I thought about it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd tried to reconcile instead. If I'd sat down with Patricia and Vanessa and my father and just talked. If I'd tried to make them understand. And then I remember that I did try that. In my first life, multiple times. I begged for understanding, for fairness, for love, and they crushed me anyway. So, no, I don't regret it. They made their choices. I just made sure they faced the consequences. What about your father? Do you think you'll ever forgive him? I was quiet for a long moment. Maybe, someday, but not yet. He was weak, and his weakness allowed them to hurt me. That's not something I can just forgive. He's been trying to reach out, Marcus said gently. He's sent letters to the office. I know, I've read them, I sighed. He says he's sorry. He says he didn't realize how bad things were. He says he wants to make amends. Do you believe him? I think he believes himself, I said. I think he genuinely didn't see what was happening because he didn't want to see it. It was easier to believe Patricia's lies than to admit he'd married someone who was abusing his daughter. That doesn't make it okay. No, I agreed. It doesn't. But maybe in a few more years I'll be ready to hear him out, to see if there's anything worth salvaging. You're more forgiving than I would be, Marcus said. I'm not forgiving, I said. I'm just tired of hating him. Hate takes energy, and I'd rather spend that energy building something positive. We walked in silence for a while. You know what the craziest part is? I said eventually. In some ways, I'm grateful to them. Grateful? If Vanessa hadn't stolen that job, I never would have met you. I never would have built Phoenix Solutions. I never would have become who I am now. I'd probably be middle management at Tech Vision, making decent money, but never reaching my full potential. So, in a twisted way, their cruelty set me free. That's a very philosophical way of looking at it, Marcus said. Well, I've had a lot of time to think, I said. Dying and being reborn gives you a different perspective on things. I can imagine. We reached our car, but neither of us moved to get in. The night was beautiful, and I wanted to savor it. Do you think it was real? Marcus asked suddenly. The dying and being reborn? Or do you think it was something else? A premonition, a vivid nightmare, a psychotic break? Does it matter? I asked. I suppose not. Either way, you acted on information you believed was true, and it changed your life. It saved my life, I corrected. However I got that information, it gave me a second chance. And I made the most of it. You certainly did, Marcus agreed. I leaned against him, feeling content in a way I never had in my first life. You know what I realized recently? What? I'm happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. Not just successful or vindicated or secure. Actually happy. I don't think I was ever truly happy in my first life, even before things got bad. I was always trying to please people, always trying to earn love that should have been freely given. But now I do things for myself. I build things because I want to, not because I'm trying to prove something to someone else. That's because you finally learned the most important lesson, Marcus said. Which is that you don't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. I smiled. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, he said, kissing my forehead. 10 years after my rebirth, I received a letter from Vanessa. It was delivered through my lawyer, who screened all communication from my former family. The lawyer had marked it as non-threatening but emotionally manipulative, recommend not reading. But I was curious. I opened it one evening, alone in my study, while Marcus was traveling for business. Dear Emma, I know you probably hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm writing this because I need you to know that I'm sorry. I've had a lot of time to think over the past 10 years, a lot of time to realize what I did to you, what my mother did to you, what we all did to you, and I'm ashamed. I was jealous of you. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. You were smart and kind, and my mother was always worried that your father would love you more than me, so she taught me to see you as competition instead of family. She taught me that your success was my failure. I should have been strong enough to reject that lesson. I should have been your sister instead of your enemy. I wasn't, and I've paid the price for that. I'm working as a teacher now, elementary school. The pay isn't great, but I love it. I'm good at it. And sometimes I think that if I'd been encouraged to find my own path instead of trying to steal yours, I might have been happy sooner. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this letter. But I wanted you to know that I've changed, that I understand what I did wrong, that if I could go back and do things differently, I would. I hope you're happy, Emma. Despite everything, I mean that. I hope you found everything you were looking for. Vanessa. I read the letter 3 times, analyzing it for hidden meanings, for manipulation tactics, for any sign of the old Vanessa. But all I found was a broken person trying to rebuild. I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. I filed it in a drawer in my desk, along with a few other mementos from my past life, reminders of where I'd come from and how far I'd traveled. Maybe someday I'd respond, maybe someday I'd be ready to have that conversation. But not yet. For now, I was content to let the past rest. 15 years after my rebirth, Phoenix Solutions was worth $10 billion. We'd expanded into AI, robotics, biotech, and clean energy. We employed over 20,000 people across 40 countries. I was on the cover of Forbes, Time, and Wired. I'd been invited to speak at the UN about technology and social impact. I'd also started a foundation, the Second Chance Foundation dedicated to helping young people who'd been failed by their families. We provided scholarships, mentorship, and seed funding for startups. We'd helped thousands of people escape abusive situations and build successful lives. It was the work I was most proud of. Marcus and I had 2 children, a daughter named Hope and a son named Phoenix. We'd named them deliberately as reminders of what mattered. Hope, because even in the darkest times, hope is what keeps you going. Phoenix, because sometimes you have to burn down your old life to build a new one. We raised them with love, support, and the understanding that family is something you create through choice, not just blood. One day, Hope, who was 8 at the time, asked me a question. "Mommy, why don't I have a grandpa or grandma like my friends?" I'd been dreading this question, but I'd prepared for it. "You do have a grandpa," I said carefully. "But he and I don't talk right now. We had some problems when I was younger and we're still working through them." "What kind of problems?" "He made some choices that hurt me," I said. "And I made some choices that hurt him. Sometimes, even when people love each other, they can hurt each other so badly that they need time apart to heal." "But you still love him?" she asked. I paused. Did I? After all these years, after everything that had happened, did I still love my father? "I love who he used to be," I said finally, before things got complicated. "And maybe someday we'll find a way back to each other, but maybe not. And that's okay too. Because love doesn't mean you have to keep people in your life who hurt you." "That's sad," Hope said. "It is," I agreed. "But it's also okay to protect yourself, even from people you love. That's an important lesson." She thought about that for a while. "Okay, but if Grandpa wants to meet me, and you think it's safe, then I'd like to meet him. Because he's part of my story, even if he's not in my life." I hugged her tight. "You're very wise for 8 years old." "I learned from the best," she said, echoing Marcus's words from years ago. After she left, I sat alone for a long time, thinking about her question. Did I want my father to meet his grandchildren? Did I want him back in my life, even in a limited way? I didn't know, but maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to find out. I called my father for the first time in 15 years on a Tuesday afternoon. He answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Hi, Dad, it's Emma." There was a long silence, then, "Emma, is that really you?" "Yes." "I've been trying to reach you for 15 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've written letters, sent emails, tried to visit your office. You never responded." "I know." "Why now? Why are you calling now?" "Because my daughter asked about you," I said. "And I realized that I've been so focused on protecting myself from the past that I forgot to think about the future." "You have a daughter?" His voice broke. "I have a granddaughter?" "2 grandchildren. Hope is 8 and Phoenix is 5. "Emma," he was crying now. "I'm so sorry for everything. For not protecting you, for not believing you, for choosing Patricia over you. I've regretted it every day for 15 years. "I know," I said. "I've read your letters." "Then why didn't you respond?" "Because I wasn't ready," I said. "I needed time to become someone who didn't need your approval anymore. Someone who could talk to you as an equal, not as a wounded daughter, desperate for her father's love. And now I'm ready to try," I said. "But we need ground rules. You hurt me, Dad, deeply. And I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen. If you want to be part of my life, you need to acknowledge what happened and commit to never letting it happen again." "I will," he said quickly. "Anything. I'll do anything." "Don't make promises you can't keep," I said. "Just be honest with me." That's all I've ever wanted. We talked for 3 hours. He told me about his divorce from Patricia, about the therapy he'd been doing, about rebuilding his business after her embezzlement nearly destroyed it. He told me about the guilt he carried, about the nights he couldn't sleep, because he kept thinking about all the times he'd failed me. I didn't absolve him. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't okay and it might never be okay. But I listened. And in listening, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "Can I meet them?" he asked finally. "Hope and Phoenix?" "Not yet," I said, "but maybe soon. I need to talk to Marcus first, and I need to make sure you're stable, that you're not going to hurt them the way you hurt me." "I understand," he said. "I just take all the time you need. I'll wait." "Dad?" "Yes. Thank you for trying. Even if it took 15 years, thank you for not giving up." "You're my daughter," he said. "I'll never give up on you again." After we hung up, I sat in my study and cried. Not sad tears exactly, more like release. The tears of someone finally letting go of a weight they'd been carrying for too long. Marcus found me there an hour later. He didn't say anything, just held me while I cried. "I called my father," I said eventually. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. Complicated." "Are you going to let him back into your life?" "Maybe. Slowly, with boundaries. And only if he proves he's changed." "That's fair," Marcus said. You don't owe him anything, Emma. Remember that." "I know," I said. "But maybe I owe myself the chance to heal, to stop letting the past control me." "You're the bravest person I know," Marcus said. "Not brave," I said. "Just tired. Tired of being angry, tired of grieving, tired of letting them live rent-free in my head. It's time to let go." 20 years after my rebirth, I stood on a stage accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Technology Leadership Council. At 43, I was one of the youngest recipients ever. But Phoenix Solutions had revolutionized multiple industries, employed over 50,000 people, and generated hundreds of billions of dollars in economic value. More importantly, the Second Chance Foundation had helped over 100,000 young people escape abusive situations and build better lives. As I gave my acceptance speech, I looked out into the audience and saw my family. Marcus and our children, of course. But also my father, sitting in the third row, tears streaming down his face. We'd rebuilt our relationship slowly over the past 5 years. It wasn't perfect. There were still wounds that might never fully heal. But we'd found a way to be in each other's lives again. He was a good grandfather to Hope and Phoenix, and he'd proven through consistent action that he'd changed. I'd even forgiven him, in a way. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the burden of anger. Vanessa was not in the audience. We'd met for coffee once, about 3 years ago. It had been awkward and painful, but we'd both apologized for our parts in the dysfunction. She was doing well, married to a good man, teaching middle school, genuinely happy. We weren't friends, we'd never be friends, but we'd made peace. Patricia was still in prison. She'd be released in 2 years, but I had no plans to ever speak to her again. Some wounds really are too deep to heal. Some people really are too toxic to have in your life, and that's okay. I'm often asked, I said in my speech, what the secret to my success is, and the answer is simple. I refused to accept other people's limitations. I refused to believe that being underestimated meant being worthless. I refused to let the people who tried to destroy me define who I would become. The audience applauded. But more than that, I continued, I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's success. It's building something so magnificent that your enemies can't help but see it. It's becoming so powerful that they can't hurt you anymore. It's living so well that their opinions become irrelevant. More applause. 20 years ago, I was told I would never amount to anything. I was robbed, betrayed, and left for dead, metaphorically speaking. And I could have let that break me. I could have spent my life bitter and angry, focused on getting even. I paused, looking at my father in the audience. He met my eyes and nodded. But I chose something better. I chose to build instead of destroy. to create instead of compete, to succeed not in spite of my enemies, but almost independently of them. Because at the end of the day, the best way to defeat someone who underestimates you is to prove them wrong so thoroughly that they become irrelevant. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, my father approached me. "That was a wonderful speech," he said. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Dad." "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different? If I'd been stronger, if Patricia had never come into our lives, if Vanessa hadn't stolen that job?" I thought about it. Sometimes. But then I remember that I like who I've become. And I'm not sure I would have become this person without those experiences. The pain shaped me. It made me stronger, smarter, more resilient. "So you're glad it happened?" "No, I said. "I'm not glad. Those were terrible years, and I wish they'd never happened. But I've made peace with them. I've turned them into fuel for something better." "That's very mature of you." I smiled. "I've had a lot of time to think about it. 20 years, in fact." We stood together in comfortable silence, watching Marcus play with our grandchildren. Yes, Hope had children of her own now. Watching the next generation laugh and play, unburdened by the pain of the past. "You broke the cycle," my father said quietly. "What?" "The cycle of hurt and dysfunction. You could have passed your pain on to Hope and Phoenix. Could have made them bitter and distrustful. But you didn't. You gave them something better." "That was always the goal," I said. "To make sure no one else had to go through what I went through." "You succeeded," he said. "In that and everything else." As the sun set on the evening of my greatest professional triumph, I realized something. I'd finally let go of Emma the victim. That girl who had died alone in a hospital bed, that girl who'd been robbed and betrayed and broken, she was gone. In her place was Emma the survivor, Emma the builder, Emma the woman who'd taken her second chance and built an empire from it. I'd won. Not just against Patricia and Vanessa, not just in business or wealth or status. I'd won the only victory that really mattered. I'd won back myself. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all.